Welcome to Crime Collective Vault, where every case is built from documented facts, verified records, and the kind of detail that most coverage leaves behind. What you are about to hear is not a dramatization. It is not speculation. It is the documented story of what happened inside a quiet Henderson home in the summer of 2023, and the secret that made it possible. There are cases that disturb you because of what was done. Then there are cases that disturb you because of who did it, and how long the truth had been hiding in plain sight before anyone thought to look. This is one of those cases. In August 2023, a woman made a phone call from inside a Henderson, Nevada home that officers who responded to the scene would later describe as one of the most disturbing crime scenes they had encountered in their careers. The man she found was someone she loved, what had been done to him, and what investigators would spend the following months uncovering about the people closest to him, would eventually reach a courtroom in Clark County, where a jury took less than 2 hours to reach its decision. At Crime Collective Vault, every story we cover is built strictly from verified facts, documented evidence, and court-confirmed testimony. No speculation presented as certainty, no detail invented for effect. If that approach to true crime is something you value, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It is the most direct way to support this channel and ensure you never miss a case. Now, Henderson, Nevada, August 7, 2023, and a bedroom door that should never have been opened. Henderson, Nevada sits roughly 16 miles southeast of the Las Vegas Strip, close enough to exist in its shadow, far enough to feel like a different world entirely. It is a city of subdivisions and cul-de-sacs, of sprinkler systems running before dawn, and neighbors who know each other by their vehicles. On the morning of August 7, 2023, a residential street called Palo Duro Drive looked exactly like every other street in that part of the city. It would not look that way for long. Just after 8 in the morning, a woman looked out the window of her home and noticed something that did not belong in the rhythm of an ordinary day. Her son's white Chevrolet truck was parked outside. That detail alone would not have alarmed most people, but she knew her son, knew his schedule, knew the way he moved through his days with the kind of precision that comes from years of building something from nothing. He was supposed to be elsewhere. He was always where he was supposed to be. She went downstairs. The dogs were locked in the backyard, howling in the sustained, directionless way that animals do when something has gone wrong and they cannot locate the source of it. The garage door was open. A chair had been knocked onto its side in the living room. Light was coming from the first-floor bedroom at the end of the hall. She moved toward it. On the bed was a figure wrapped tightly in several layers of blankets. Only a pair of feet and one hand were visible, the hand trembling slightly, or perhaps that was just the light. She reached for the fabric and pulled. What she saw underneath caused her to step back and reach for her phone. When the emergency dispatcher asked her to check whether the person in the bed was still breathing, she said words that the responding officers would not forget. "He doesn't have a face. He doesn't have a neck." Henderson police arrived at the Palo Duro Drive residence at approximately 8:40 that morning. The officers who entered the first-floor bedroom stopped almost immediately. The smell reached them before anything else, a dense, chemical combination of ammonia and bleach that had concentrated in the enclosed space and was still actively reacting. The walls were clean, unnervingly, completely clean. No visible blood on any surface, no spatter, no evidence of the violence that the figure on the bed made undeniable. Officers trained their flashlights toward the mattress and found something that none of them had seen before. The body was giving off a faint, visible steam. A chemical process was still underway, breaking down tissue and degrading the mattress beneath. Johnathan Willette was 46 years old. What the medical examiner who received his body the following day would document was methodical and deliberate. Forensic testimony at trial later confirmed that he had been decapitated after death. The process carried out using both a knife and a mechanically powered saw. The walls were clean, because whoever was responsible had ensured they would be. His phone was gone, his wallet was gone, his keys were gone, and his head had been removed from the scene entirely. It was never recovered. What investigators standing in that bedroom on the morning of August 7th could not yet answer was the question that would drive the entire case forward. Someone else had been in that house while this happened. Someone had been asleep upstairs. And the person responsible had walked out of that room, through that house, and into the pre-dawn dark of a Henderson street without leaving a single visible trace of themselves behind. The question of how that was possible would only be answered once investigators understood who Johnathan Willette was, and who had been given the kind of access to him that this crime required. Before this documentary moves into the relationships and the secrets and the legal proceedings that followed, it owes Johnathan Willette something the crime scene coverage largely did not give him: a portrait, not of what was done to him, but of who he actually was before any of this happened. Johnathan James Willette was born into a military family in Tokyo, Japan. He grew up in the particular environment that military upbringing produces: structured, mobile, self-reliant, in ways that civilian childhoods rarely demand. Discipline was not something imposed on him from the outside. It became the internal architecture he carried into every room he ever walked into as an adult. When his family eventually settled in Nevada, he arrived in a state that rewards a specific kind of person, someone willing to work in the spaces most people overlook, to build something from sustained effort rather than inherited position. He spent more than 2 decades working on the Las Vegas Strip, selling timeshare packages to tourists passing through a city designed to make people feel like anything was possible. It is work that demands more than salesmanship. It requires the ability to read a stranger inside 30 seconds, to build genuine rapport with someone who has no particular reason to trust you, and to maintain that energy across hundreds of interactions without letting the weight of rejection accumulate into something visible. Johnathan was exceptionally good at it. Those who knew him described a man of natural charisma who backed it with an almost compulsive work ethic, someone who did not separate his professional identity from his personal one, because both were built on the same foundation of showing up and following through. He channeled that foundation into his own ventures. First, a recruiting agency, helping local residents find stable employment. Then, just before the pandemic reshaped the economy, a logistics company that grew quickly enough to attract clients that most new operations spend years trying to reach. He was building something real, and alongside that professional identity, he was raising 2 daughters with a woman named Devyn Michaels, a relationship that was never formally a marriage but was, for a significant stretch of time, the personal center of his life. In the months before his death, a family court had awarded Johnathan full custody of those daughters, following allegations of child abuse involving Devyn. The ruling was unambiguous. The court had reviewed the circumstances and sided entirely with him. For most people in that position, the logical response would have been to treat that judgment as a boundary, a legal and personal line that clarified exactly where the relationship now stood. Johnathan did not read it that way. He read it as a responsibility. His daughters needed stability. They needed both parents present in some functional form. And if that required him to manage an arrangement that other people might have walked away from, then he would manage it. He organized the planned move himself. He identified the property. He paid the rent. He packed the boxes. Acquaintances who saw him during those days described a man who seemed to believe, with complete sincerity, that proximity and goodwill could smooth over fractures that ran far deeper than he understood. It was the same instinct that had made him successful in every professional context he had ever operated in. The belief that if you showed up, worked hard enough, and refused to let things fall apart, they wouldn't. That instinct had served him for decades. In the summer of 2023, it put him in a bedroom on Palo Duro Drive on the night of August 6th, And what was waiting for him there was something no amount of goodwill or determination could have prepared him for, because the house he was preparing to move into was not what he had been told it was, and the secret living inside it had been years in the making. To understand what happened inside that bedroom, you first have to understand the person who was in it with Johnathan that night, not the version she presented to different people in different contexts, but the documented reality that investigators and prosecutors would spend 2 years assembling piece by piece. Devyn Michaels moved through the world under several names. Publicly, she was known as Devyn Michaels. In prior years, she had worked in adult entertainment under the names Nikki Fairchild and Tracy Tavares. These were not simply stage names in the conventional sense. They were distinct identities, each with its own presentation, its own paper trail, its own version of who she was and where she had come from. The practice of maintaining parallel identities, of being different things to different people in different contexts, was not incidental to who Devyn Michaels was. It was foundational. Her relationship with Johnathan Willette was never formalized through marriage, but it was long, and it was complicated in the way that relationships are when children become the permanent thread connecting two people who can no longer make the rest of it work. They had 2 daughters together. The relationship cycled through periods of proximity and separation over the years, an on-again, off-again dynamic that those around them had grown accustomed to tracking. Johnathan remained consistent in one thing throughout those cycles. His commitment to his daughters superseded every other consideration, including his own comfort and his own safety. In October 2022, that commitment was tested in a new way. Devyn faced allegations of child abuse involving the 2 girls. The court proceedings that followed were not ambiguous in their outcome. Johnathan was awarded full custody. The ruling removed the girls from Devyn's primary care and placed them entirely under his supervision. It was, by any legal and practical measure, a significant consequence, one that reconfigured the power dynamic between them in a way that could not easily be undone. What prosecutors would later argue, and what the evidence at trial was constructed to demonstrate, was that this shift did not cause Devyn to step back. It caused her to recalibrate. Johnathan's plan to move into the home she was living in, framed by him as a gesture toward family unity, a way to give his daughters 2 present parents under one roof, was received, according to the prosecution's account, as a threat rather than an olive branch. His presence in that house would have meant visibility, accountability, the kind of daily proximity that makes certain things impossible to maintain. At trial, Devyn herself described her relationship with Johnathan in terms that the prosecution found telling. She told investigators the dynamic had become transactional. She would be physically available to him, and he would continue covering household expenses. It was a description that stripped the relationship of any remaining pretense of partnership and revealed something more calculated beneath the surface. A man who believed he was working toward reconciliation. A woman who had already determined what she needed the arrangement to provide. She had a reason, she told investigators, for why physical intimacy was limited on the night of August 6th, a recent gynecological procedure. It was a detail that provided a practical explanation for why the massage she offered would unfold the way it did. With Johnathan lying face down, his back toward her, in a position of complete physical trust. He accepted the offer. He had no reason not to. He had known this woman for years. She was the mother of his children. And he was, by every account of everyone who knew him, a man who defaulted toward trust rather than suspicion. What Johnathan did not know, as he settled into that bedroom on the evening of August 6th, was that the home he was preparing to move into was already occupied by someone whose presence there would have changed everything. Someone he knew. Someone whose connection to Devyn Michaels had been carefully concealed from him for years, until it wasn't. And even then, he had chosen to believe it could be managed. Every case has a detail that reframes everything that came before it. A single fact that, once known, makes you look back at the entire story differently. In this case, that detail had been living inside the Willette family for years, before anyone outside of it understood what they were actually looking at. Deviere Willette was Johnathan's son from a previous relationship. By the time this case reached a courtroom in November 2025, he was 29 years old, a physically imposing man who worked as a home security systems technician, someone professionally comfortable with electronics, surveillance equipment, and the kind of heavy-duty tools that his job required on a daily basis. For a significant stretch of his adult life, he and his father had been close. Then, at some point that people around them struggled to precisely date, that closeness ended. The relationship fractured. Deviere became distant in the way that people do when something has changed that they are not prepared to explain. The explanation, when it finally surfaced, was not one that fit any ordinary category of family conflict. Deviere testified at trial that when he was 19 years old, while Devyn Michaels was still his father's partner, while she was still in a relationship with the man who had raised him, he and Devyn began a sexual relationship. He said it himself on the witness stand, in a Clark County courtroom, in front of a jury, with the particular heaviness of someone unburdening a thing they have carried for a long time. He framed it with a sentence that courtroom observers noted for its raw, unpolished honesty. He told the jury he had been trying to fill his father's shoes. Shoes, he said, that he had no business filling. By November 2021, the relationship had progressed well beyond what either of them had initially described to anyone who asked. Deviere and Devyn were married, not quietly, not minimally, but in the full conventional register of a traditional ceremony. White dress, veil, a suit for the groom, wedding rings on both hands, photographs that captured the occasion with the same composed formality as any other marriage record. When investigators later discovered a wedding photo album during the search of Devyn's residence, they found images that left no interpretive room. This had not been a bureaucratic arrangement. It had been a wedding. When police and prosecutors first asked about the marriage, both Deviere and Devyn offered the same explanation independently. It was a marriage of convenience, arranged for insurance purposes, with no physical component. The defense at trial would attempt to use this framing as a foundation for its alternative theory of the crime. The prosecution had a different set of materials to work with. Intimate photographs and private messages between the two of them dated back to 2016, to the period when Deviere was in his late teens and Devyn was still his father's partner. The messages and images told a story that the insurance explanation could not accommodate. Johnathan eventually learned about the marriage. The precise timing of when he was told remains part of the documented record. Deviere confirmed at trial that he had revealed it to his father before the murder. Johnathan's response, according to accounts presented in court, was the kind of reaction that anyone would expect from a man receiving that particular piece of information. Fury, disbelief, a text message that made his feelings unmistakably clear. And then, characteristically, devastatingly, an attempt to absorb it, to process it, to find some version of the situation that could still be managed. His plan to move into the home where Devyn and Deviere were living did not change. It accelerated. Prosecutors argued that for Devyn, this was the pressure point that could not be negotiated away. Johnathan moving in meant the life she had constructed with Deviere, the home, the arrangement, the carefully maintained parallel reality, would be directly exposed to the one person it had been hidden from all along. The defense offered a different reading of the same facts. They argued it was Deviere who had the most to lose. His father was coming to take his home, his wife, and the life he had built. And Deviere, they suggested, was a young man with the tools, the knowledge, and the motive to do something about it. On the evening of August 6, 2023, Johnathan and Devyn arrived together at his mother's home on Palo Duro Drive. They settled into the first-floor bedroom. Deviere was at the Las Vegas residence he shared with Devyn. He texted her that evening to say he had put the girls to sleep and was going to bed. What happened next in that Henderson bedroom would become the central question of a 2-week trial, and the answer, when the jury finally delivered it, came in less than 2 hours. What happened inside that first-floor bedroom on Palo Duro Drive was reconstructed not through witness accounts or confessions alone, but through surveillance footage, vehicle data, cell phone records, toxicology findings, and forensic testimony that together produced a timeline investigators could anchor to specific minutes. This is what the evidence established. At approximately 10:05 in the evening on August 6, 2023, surveillance cameras at a Chevron gas station captured Johnathan and Devyn together. They entered the store, spent roughly 5 minutes inside, and left. It was an ordinary errand, the kind of stop that appears in thousands of hours of gas station footage every night across this country, and means nothing until it becomes the last documented image of a man still alive. Toxicology findings presented at trial established that by the time Johnathan settled into the first-floor bedroom that night, he had alcohol and THC in his system. The combination was consistent with a man who had come to the end of a long and physically demanding day and had genuinely wound down. His guard was not lowered because he was careless. It was lowered because he was home, in a manner of speaking, with someone he had known for years. Devyn offered him a massage. She had already provided investigators with her explanation for why physical intimacy was not on the table that evening, a recent medical procedure. Johnathan accepted the offer and lay face down on the bed. What happened next, Devyn herself described to investigators, though the version she offered shifted significantly depending on when she was asked and what the evidence in front of her had already established. What she eventually acknowledged was this. At some point, while Johnathan was lying face down, she struck him in the head with a wooden object. She told investigators he went limp. She told them she had not intended to kill him, that she had wanted to hurt him badly enough to require hospitalization, so that she could, in her own words, figure out what to do about her children. She said he was still breathing when she stopped. The forensic evidence presented at trial did not support the conclusion that the situation ended there. Medical testimony established that decapitation occurred after death, carried out using a knife and a mechanically powered saw. The walls of that bedroom were clean, because the chemical agents applied to Johnathan's body were applied deliberately, after the fact, in an attempt to degrade biological evidence. A meat cleaver belonging to Johnathan's mother was reported missing from the kitchen the following day. It was never recovered. Neither was the mechanical saw. Neither was his head. The vehicle data is precise on one point. The onboard computer of Devyn's Nissan Armada recorded the moment the engine started, and the vehicle left the Palo Duro Drive property. 2:04 in the morning on August 7th. Cell phone records established that her device and Johnathan's phone traveled through the city along the same route until approximately 2:45 a.m., meaning his phone was in her vehicle, moving with her, well after she had left the scene. At approximately 2:30 a.m., a 24-hour pharmacy drive-through captured Devyn on surveillance making a purchase. She appeared composed. She was wearing a white tank top and light blue shorts. There were no visible stains on her clothing, no chemical residue. Nothing about her appearance suggested a person who had spent hours inside a room saturated with bleach and ammonia. Prosecutors alleged that Johnathan's head was transported from the Henderson crime scene in her vehicle to her Las Vegas residence, where it was disposed of in a trash receptacle. Investigators believed it was subsequently collected by a waste service. It was never found. Devyn Michaels was arrested on August 15, 2023, 8 days after Johnathan's body was discovered. What she told investigators during that formal interview, and the way that account collapsed under the weight of what detectives already had, would become the foundation upon which the entire prosecution was built. By the time detectives sat across from Devyn Michaels in a formal interview room on August 15, 2023, they had already been to her home. They had already walked her driveway. They had already opened drawers. What they brought into that room with them was not a theory. It was a collection of objects and records that made certain explanations impossible before she had a chance to offer them. The first break had come almost immediately, and it had come from the most visible place imaginable. When officers arrived at Devyn's Las Vegas residence in the hours after Johnathan's body was discovered, her daughters were outside in the driveway. The girls noticed something on the ground near their mother's Nissan Armada before the officers did. A cracked cell phone, face up on the pavement, a dark brownish stain visible on the screen. A preliminary examination at the scene indicated the substance was consistent with blood. The phone belonged to Johnathan. The search warrant followed. Inside Devyn's bedroom, at the bottom of a dresser drawer beneath stacks of clothing, investigators found a plastic bag tied shut. Inside it were Johnathan's wallet, his identification, his truck keys, and his social security card. Items he carried on his person every day, now hidden under her underwear with the specific deliberateness of someone who had made a decision about where to put them. In a separate area of the residence, officers came across a photo album, new, recently assembled. Inside were wedding photographs, a woman in a white dress and veil, a man in a suit, both wearing rings. The groom was Deviere Willette. The discovery confirmed in physical, documented form what investigators had only begun to understand about the architecture of relationships inside this family. When Devyn sat down for her formal interview on August 15th, she arrived composed, projecting the kind of surface confidence that detectives who conduct these interviews recognize as a prepared posture rather than a natural one. Her first account was straightforward. The blood on Johnathan's phone screen, she explained, came from a cut he had sustained on his hand while packing moving boxes. It was an ordinary explanation for an ordinary injury, the kind of detail that sounds reasonable until it meets the medical record sitting on the other side of the table. The examiner who had received Johnathan's body found no cuts, no abrasions, no injuries of any kind to his hands. The first story did not survive contact with that finding. She shifted. The second account introduced self-defense as its organizing principle. During the massage, she said, Johnathan had behaved in a way that frightened her. She had grabbed a wooden object from nearby. She described it at various points as a stick or a club, and struck him once in the head. She said he went limp, but was still breathing when she left the room. She said she panicked and fled. It was a version of events designed to reframe what she had done as a reactive, frightened response to aggression, rather than a planned act. Detectives noted that she had also told investigators she had not intended to kill him, only to hurt him enough to require hospitalization, so she could, in her own words, figure out what to do with her children. The vehicle's onboard computer had already established she did not leave the property until 2:04 in the morning. The pharmacy surveillance footage had already established she appeared at a drive-through window at 2:30 in the morning wearing spotless white clothing. The cell phone data had already established that Johnathan's phone traveled with her through the city until nearly 2:45 a.m. The timeline she described, a panicked flight from a chaotic scene, did not fit inside the hours the electronic record had already filled in. On the same day as her formal interview, August 15th, Devyn submitted to a polygraph examination. The examiner later reported a significant physiological reaction to a single specific question: whether she had participated in any way in Johnathan Willette's death. She was arrested that evening on a single count of open murder and booked without bond. The defense, when the case eventually reached trial, did not dispute that Devyn had been in the room. It disputed what that presence meant. Attorneys directed the jury's attention toward Deviere, his professional access to power tools and mechanical saws, his expertise in security systems and surveillance blind spots, the fractured relationship with a father he had, by his own earlier admission to detectives, described as someone he had never gotten along with. They noted that his alibi for the night of August 6th rested entirely on his own testimony. They noted that intimate photographs and messages between him and Devyn dating to 2016 revealed a young man with everything to lose if Johnathan moved into that house. No physical evidence, no digital record, no surveillance footage placed Deviere Willette at the crime scene on the night in question. Investigators had interviewed him multiple times and had not named him as a suspect. But the defense had planted something in the jury room that the prosecution would need to dismantle before deliberations began. They would get their opportunity, and it would come from a phone call that Devyn Michaels had not expected anyone outside of that conversation to ever hear. The case of Nevada versus Devyn Michaels did not proceed in a straight line from arrest to courtroom. It moved through a plea agreement, a withdrawal, a sentencing hearing that became something else entirely, and finally, a 2-week trial that forced every person in that Clark County courtroom to sit with the full weight of what had happened on Palo Duro Drive in the early hours of August 7, 2023. In the period following her arrest, Devyn Michaels reached an agreement with prosecutors. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The terms of the deal made her eligible for parole after serving 15 years. It was, by any practical legal measure, a significant concession from the state, an acknowledgement that a trial carries uncertainty and that a guaranteed outcome at 15 years represented a resolution that served the interests of finality. The plea was entered. The sentencing hearing was scheduled. On July 17, 2025, that hearing did not proceed as expected. Devyn arrived in court and began to speak. She was crying. She told Judge Tiara Jones that she understood no one in Johnathan's family believed her, that she understood how things appeared, but that she could prove her innocence. She accused law enforcement of manipulation. She addressed the prosecutor directly and with evident anger. Judge Jones reviewed the circumstances of the original plea and determined it had been entered voluntarily, knowingly, and intelligently. The plea could not be withdrawn on those grounds. The case was ordered to trial. The trial opened on November 5, 2025, in the Clark County Regional Justice Center. 14 jurors, including 2 alternates, heard opening statements from both sides. Chief Deputy District Attorney John Giordani told the jury to buckle up, then showed them crime scene photographs of Johnathan's decapitated body and laid out the prosecution's central argument with clarity. Devyn Michaels had killed Johnathan Willette because his presence in her home threatened the life she had built with Deviere and their daughters. Johnathan was the obstacle between Devyn and the future she had chosen. The only way to secure that future was to remove him from it permanently. Defense attorney Robert Draskovich offered the jury a different architecture entirely. He pointed toward Deviere, a young man, he argued, whose first love was being taken from him, whose father, a man he had described to detectives as someone who had never been there for him, was preparing to move into his home and displace him from the relationship that had defined his adult life. Draskovich reminded jurors that Deviere had access to power saws, that he understood surveillance systems and their blind spots, that his alibi for the night of August 6th was his own word and nothing more. He invoked, in closing arguments, the story of Oedipus, a literary reference that landed in the courtroom with the particular weight of something that should not have needed to be said aloud. Deviere took the stand. He told the jury he had not killed his father. He told them he loved him. He described the sexual relationship with Devyn beginning when he was 19, confirming it under oath in a room full of strangers, with his father's killer sitting feet away. The defense cross-examined him on the inconsistencies between what he had told police in early interviews and what he was now saying under oath. He acknowledged that he had originally described his marriage to Devyn as sexless and for insurance purposes only. The intimate photographs and messages dating to 2016 were shown to the jury. The distance between his early account and the documented record was made visible. Then the prosecution played the jail call. Recorded while Devyn was being held at the Clark County Detention Center, the conversation captured her telling Deviere that investigators had nothing substantial against her, just a bottle of cleaning solution. She sounded certain. She sounded like someone who had assessed the situation and concluded she was going to be fine. Deviere's response did not match her tone. He told her he had seen the news coverage. He told her he did not know what to believe. He told her he was leaving for California. The call ended. Whatever partnership the defense had been suggesting existed between them dissolved in the space of that recorded exchange. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, but with the particular coldness of a man stepping away from something he had decided was no longer his problem. The jury left to deliberate at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, on November 14, 2025. They returned with a verdict in approximately 2 hours. Devyn Michaels was found guilty on all counts, first-degree murder with the use of a deadly weapon. The speed of the deliberation was, in its own way, a statement about how much work the evidence had already done before the jury ever left the room. On January 8, 2026, Judge Tierra Jones delivered the sentence. 20 years to life for the murder. A consecutive 8 to 20 years for the deadly weapon enhancement. 28 years to life in total, meaning Devyn Michaels would not be eligible for parole consideration until she had served 28 years, with credit for approximately 2 years already served. The Chief Deputy District Attorney told the judge that the extreme violence of the crime placed Devyn at the far end of the spectrum of what human beings are capable of doing to one another. Defense counsel asked the court to consider redemption and argued the act had been impulsive rather than planned. Devyn addressed the judge briefly. She said that no matter what she said, Johnathan's family would feel the same way. She was taken from the courtroom. The sentence was recorded. The case was closed, in the formal sense that cases are closed when all the paperwork has been filed and all the decisions have been made. But there were people who left that courthouse on January 8, 2026, for whom none of those documents resolved the thing they were actually carrying. And this documentary will not end with a sentence. It will end with them. There is a version of this story that ends with a sentence and a gavel and a defendant being led from a courtroom. That version is accurate but incomplete, because the people most affected by what happened on Palo Duro Drive in the early hours of August 7, 2023, did not walk out of that courthouse and into resolution. They walked out into the rest of their lives, and those lives are now permanently shaped by something they did not choose and could not have prevented. Johnathan Willette's head was never recovered. His family buried a man who was not whole, who could not be made whole, because the person responsible had ensured that a complete farewell was not possible. That detail sits outside the legal record. The sentence does not address it. The verdict does not repair it. It is simply a fact that Johnathan's family carries, alongside every other fact this case produced, into every day that comes after. His 2 daughters were both under the age of 13 at the time of sentencing. They lost their father to an act of violence carried out by their mother inside their grandmother's home. The particular cruelty of that inheritance is not something a court document can fully account for. 2 children who will grow up assembling their understanding of what happened from sources that will never make it simple, or clean, or bearable in the way that children deserve things to be. Their father packed moving boxes for them, organized a rental property, believed with everything he had that he could give them a version of stability that required him to remain in proximity to the person who would kill him. He was wrong about what that proximity would cost. He was not wrong about what his daughters deserved. Deviere Willette was never charged. He was never named as a suspect by Henderson police, who interviewed him multiple times and found no physical or digital evidence placing him at the scene. He testified against the woman he had married in secret. the woman who had drawn him into a relationship that began when he was 19 years old and ended in a Clark County courtroom. He told the jury he wished he had divorced her. He said he had been trying to fill shoes he had no business filling. After the verdict, the chief deputy district attorney told reporters he was extremely grateful the jury had seen Deviere's innocence alongside the overwhelming weight of evidence against Devyn. Deviere left for California. The two remain legally married as of the conclusion of these proceedings, though he expressed his intention to end that arrangement. He is 29 years old. Whatever shape the rest of his life takes, it will be built on the foundation of what this case revealed about the years that came before it. Johnathan's family members who spoke at sentencing did not use their time to address the sentence itself. They used it to speak about him, the man who showed up, the man who believed broken things could be repaired if you were willing to do the work, the man whose professional life was built on the ability to connect with people who had no particular reason to trust him, and who brought that same instinct home, to his family, where it made him vulnerable in ways his professional resilience could not protect against. If you have stayed with this story from the beginning, the team at Crime Collective Vault is genuinely grateful. Every case we cover is researched with the same commitment to accuracy and the same respect for the people at the center of it. If this documentary gave you something worth carrying, a clearer picture of who Johnathan was, or how something this devastating was allowed to develop across so many years, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who follows true crime with the same seriousness you do. It is the most direct way to ensure this work continues, and that cases like this one are given the time and depth they deserve. His head was never recovered, but his name is Johnathan James Willette. And that is what this story was always about.